It has been almost 78 years since the mysterious incident at Roswell, New Mexico.
But what if I told you there was another crash that happened 250 miles away in less than a week from that one?
Could our space technology and sophisticated military advancements come from another world?
Or is it another dimension with a nefarious agenda?
We're going to expose some new information that maybe you didn't know and connect the dots to a few of the biggest alien crash landing sites around the world.
This is an exciting series that you are not going to want to miss. Welcome to Live Life in the Spirit. We're your hosts. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg. If you have not watched any of our previous content, or even if you just need to get caught up on this current series, we've done a couple of them on stargates, portals, and wormholes. You can find all of our content on our website at livelifeinthespirit.com, and also on Rumble and YouTube. All of our videos are posted there as well.
And you can catch us on any of your favorite podcast sites as well. And for those of you who maybe don't even realize, we have merchandise as well. God is still writing your story. Stop stealing the pen. I think that's about the best line you could have. We get so many comments, everybody that reads our shirt.
Oh yeah, somebody always stops me and says they love it or they love the message. And so if you want a good conversation piece and a great shirt, definitely check it out.
And the best part is it's got the QR code to our website right on the back. So people could just scan your shirt and it'll take them right to the content. I know I'm a lot older than you, but let's face it. Even my parents were not born yet when 1947 happened. Yet growing up, that is all I heard. My father was enamored with aliens, UFOs, sci-fi, and we actually even had an encounter when I was about 8 to 10 years old. All that being said, I do not know any of the nuts and bolts or the space-age material that was left in New Mexico. In fact, I didn't even know a lot of the details. How about you?
I knew very little. I mean, I grew up hearing about it and hearing about Area 51, but it was always kind of left to fringe groups and that kind of things. And was it a government cover-up or something else? I didn't give a lot of thought to it, but I had heard about it, and that's really all it was. A story. So it was July 4th, 1947, right after World War II, that something strange happened just outside of Roswell, New Mexico.
Well, there have been numerous testimonies from ranchers, the firemen, a nurse, and a sheriff, who were the very first on the scene to see and witness what had happened. They even have eyewitnesses from over 50 miles away where objects skipped and flew over the mountain ridge where they were camping.
And no doubt many of you have heard about Roswell, Area 51, Hangar 84, and the military was actually honest at first as they allowed the papers to print. And we'll put a picture up of the article, but it says RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in the Roswell region.
And then by the next day, oh, shock of all shocks, immediately they retracted their statement and they told everyone it was nothing more than a simple weather balloon. But if you notice where the article is.
Yeah, the headline, General Rainey empties Roswell saucer. But then the article itself is just this little
bitty thing clear over on the right side. And as you know, we read left to right. So that's like the last thing you would have read.
Yep. So to go through some of the different people who encountered some of the debris or were part of that, Mac Brazel is a big part of it. He was a hired hand or a lead rancher on the Foster Ranch. And he said that he went out one day and he found some debris and that there was this terrible stench associated with it, like a sulfur or an ammonia. So he picked up some of it and he took it into Roswell.
Well, and then Jesse Marcel was sent to check out the debris field, which he did.
And he was stationed at the military base there.
So what do we know? Well, Jesse Marcel was original Army Major, Chief Intelligence Officer, who was a specialist with the weather balloons. Think about this. He was a specialist with the weather balloons that went up all the time. he heard the crash and he went out to see, and the debris field was, they said, several football fields in size. And it was this foil-like material, but it was indestructible. Even a sledgehammer, you'd hit it and it'd bounce off. The big thing that everyone said about this material, what was so weird, it was thin, but it was weightless. Mm-hmm. And if you crumpled it up and stuck it in your pocket, when you brought it back out,
it opened back up and just went flat
to its original shape.
With no wrinkles or anything. That it didn't hold, like a ball of foil, if you wrinkle it up and you spread it back out, it's
or even mylar balloons, or whatever. It does not
hold the wrinkle.
In fact, one of the gals who saw it said it looked like water.
Yeah, when it was dropped back down, it was like it spread like water. I thought that was a cool way to visualize that.
Mm-hmm. Well, General Ramsey told Marcel not to talk about it, and he put out the cover story about the weather balloon. So here's a picture of Jesse Marcel Sr. When he was in the military and his rank. And like we said, he worked with these weather balloons all the time. So when the Army comes out and they put a weather balloon in his living room,
right,
pieces of it, to take his picture.
And they said, okay, we're going to do an article, we're going to have, do some photos with the paper. And they didn't tell him that what was going to be in the picture was not the debris that he had brought in or seen. So his face captures a lot in the pictures, I think.
You can just look at him going, seriously?
This is not the same. One of these things is not like the other.
And someone who is a specialist with the weather balloons would know what a weather balloon looked like.
Right, and would not have made that mistake. So he would have seen weather balloons almost daily. It would have been almost impossible for him to mistake them. And the material that was there on the floor in that picture is a weather balloon and not the debris that he took to Fort Worth.
Well, if you look at it, it's kind of crumpled and it's like, it's not anything at all what anybody who had seen it described. And as we get into this, we're going to bring in a few other eyewitnesses that were actually there and when they had to go look at different pieces and what they all kind of came to. Interesting that now, all these years later, we actually have something that's very close,
right, to what was out there that day. So it was interesting. Marcel told his wife that it was this really thin aluminum foil and that it had a memory. That's what they talked about, that it would go back to the way it was. Now, he didn't see any bodies because as we go along, we learned in the Roswell area, there were actually 2 different locations where debris and things were found, but he didn't see bodies. What he said he saw was like the outer part of the spaceship or the saucer. And then there was another piece, or more pieces actually, at a different site.
Well, because of the way the military is, everything's very compartmentalized, especially when you get into specialty groups and all the different letters, the 3 letters, agencies. And so they don't talk back and forth. And so you can have 2 separate different groups that you can be real close to and have no idea that they're looking at the same thing. So he did not know about the bodies, but he had actually heard about them, and he knew that they were men that were trustworthy and reliable. So he said if they said there were bodies, he believes that there were. Okay, so we want to dive in a little more on this picture. So when you saw the picture of Jesse Marcel on this side, the whole picture, you have General Ramey on the other side, and he has this letter in his hand. Now, unbeknownst to him,
technology advanced.
And he had the letter. I don't think he even knew that he had the writing to the outside.
Right.
And even back then, you can't really tell hardly anything. And if you think back in 1947, right, the photograph was not that well. Mm-hmm. But through technology and our forensic stuff, David Rudek was actually able to bring this up and decipher it. And here's the cool thing. It talks about, acknowledges that a disc, it talks about the disc several times in there, and it says the victims of the wreck. So right there, as they're posing for this whole picture that is nothing more but a weather balloon, he's holding the paperwork that's talking about the disc and
the
bodies.
That's right. Jesse Marcel had a son, actually Jesse Jr., and all of this happened when he was 11 years old. And he remembers his dad coming home with debris from the crash site. His dad woke him and his mom up and showed him all of it. And he remembers that there was like a sort of a metallic bar piece that had sort of hieroglyphic type symbols on it. And then indestructible foil type pieces. So again, that's that material that goes back. And then some black plastic type pieces as well. And actually for that bar piece, Jesse Sr. remembered enough of it that he had a replica designed for the members of the family.
This is really awesome. I mean, I want you to think about it. This is more or less kind of like hieroglyphics.
Mm-hmm.
We have no clue what it means.
No, it's a language we're not familiar with yet.
Well, Kristen and I have pored over hours and hours and hours of videos, of audio, of reading books. And again, what we've tried to do is, we know that for the most part, people do not have that kind of time to spend really digging into something.
Right.
And so, and again, once you've seen one, you've seen a lot, but you could pull out some nuggets. We did with each one. You had to muddle through a lot of it that you already knew, but you could pull out little snippets here and there. Mm-hmm. So what we tried to do is kind of compile together for you the nuts and bolts of what really went down at Roswell. This was back in 47, but what they have now discovered, even all the way up to now, and what they're about ready to release.
Yes.
The unredacted version of what was going on. And a lot of this information has since come forth because once military people started retiring, they could talk about it.
They felt more free to talk.
Or when they were on their deathbed, they started talking about it. And all their stories were really collaborating.
Oh yeah, very, very similar. Nothing that took away from what the other said at all.
So we watched these interviews with Jesse Marcel Jr., he was a very respected, he went into the military too, but he was also a doctor, and he served on many tours. And then they did an interview with his wife and son after Jesse Jr. passed away as well. And there again, their stories didn't change.
Right.
They also found a gentleman who was still living. He was in his 80s, and he was part of that debris cleanup. He was one of those soldiers that they went in and grabbed and told them to come out, and they were like, 10 feet apart if that, and to scan, or maybe 6 feet apart, and they were to go through this whole debris field and just pick up
all the pieces and put them in their bag.
And he said the same thing. He went to pick it up and crunch it up, put his bag, and it popped right back open again.
Yep.
I wonder how he got it to stay. I wonder because he kept talking about picking up pieces and sticking it in his
Slide
bag.
it in there like paper, I guess. I don't know. Well, and it was interesting because he said once he was done in the debris field and he just turned that bag in, he never saw it again.
It had just disappeared. Now, when they took him, and Jesse Jr. was still alive at this time, and they had a bunch of different types of metal, and they wanted them to look through to see what they thought. Of course, most of them, they were sheet metal at the beginning. They're like, no, too heavy, sheet metal, too thick. And they get all the way down, and they get down to foil. No, it wasn't foil, it wasn't aluminum, it wasn't any of this. And then they picked up an acetone type metal. Now, when I think of acetone, I think of liquid form. I didn't know they had acetone metal. But it was very thin, almost lightweight, and you could fold it and it would
come back.
Go right back. It had memory. Then they had mylar, which was even thinner yet, but it just crumpled. I mean, there was nothing to it. And it was funny how each man said it's that one, but it wasn't as shiny.
Right. And that almost it was a little bit more lightweight even, they thought, but very, very close to that.
Now, the acetone sheet metal that they had there for them to look at did not exist in 1947.
Right.
This has just been since early 2000s, 2005, something like that. Wasn't it? Or,
I don't remember.
It was much later, much later. Which makes you wonder, where did we come up with that acetone sheet metal?
Who knows? There was a man named Colonel Hill who met a couple, Jim and Carolyn Rankin, on Lackland Air Force Base at San Antonio when he was about 91. And at that point, he was ready to talk about what he'd seen. So he was an intelligence officer at Fort Worth at the time of the Roswell crash, and he was sent to the crash site. He told her that it was not a weather balloon, and that when he got there, that they had 2 bodies, and there was a third creature that was still alive. He said they were very small in stature, and because he was a communications officer and did some different things, he was trying to communicate with it. They were trying to save the one that was still alive, but it was gravely injured. He said that had 6 fingers and not 5, which is very interesting. But he was not able to communicate with it, but he tried to. And he felt bad that he couldn't communicate with it, and he knew that it was injured and they weren't able to help it. So the bodies and all of the material were moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Now, that's not the only time that we've heard about one still alive. There were other witnesses that were driving down Country Road, wherever the crash site of the pod really was.
Right, not the one where Jesse
debris.
Marcel went. That was the debris field. But then there was another one where there was actually the saucer kind of bounced.
When it came down and hit, a bunch of the debris scattered, and then it went up, and that's kind of where that mountain ridge was with the trees, that the other ones were camping, and it sheared off the tops of the trees, which still are, and it like melted that like glass, and then it came down and crashed. So on that road where this other couple was at, they saw a little one that was out walking around. It said it was the same thing. Looked like it was about 10 years old. It was about 4 feet tall, and it was gravely injured.
So this incident was covered up pretty quickly, and everything was hidden. Everybody was told hush hush, but it didn't stop there, actually. So Jesse Marcel Jr. talked about the fact that when they would have people at their house and talking about Roswell, they would get calls where no one would be on the phone. And then his wife would get calls when he left home, asking if he had left yet. And there were times when he was followed, and then he actually got called to the White House.
When he was in D.C. for something different, they knew who he was and where he was traveling to. They knew everything about him. He was followed at different times. He was taken to the White House to a secure room with Senator C. Richard D'Amato. And he was told that the book was true by Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt.
And that kind of told the truth about what actually happened at Roswell.
That had to have been really unnerving. Of course, back then it was a lot easier to wiretap and phone tap and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, when you feel like eyes are watching you, they were. They were listening in on everything.
It would have been very unsettling. One, to take that kind of darker side of this and go a little bit further with it. So Frankie Rowe was the daughter of a Roswell fireman who was sent to the crash site because when initially it happened, they thought maybe it was a plane crash. And so I'm sure somebody called 911 and they sent firemen and I think they took a nurse because they had heard that there might be people who were injured.
Well, they didn't know what it was, just something had come in that there was a crash. And so, yes, there was this one particular nurse that went out, actually, I don't know if she went with the fireman, I think she went out with the sheriff.
Might have been, yeah.
And she saw the bodies. And she testified to that there were 3 of them. 2 were dead, 1 was still badly injured. And she didn't know what to do. Right. I can't only even imagine. And then shortly after that, then the firemen went out. That was this gal's dad. And he told her the same thing. He said he saw 2 dead by day after all this happened before the military had gotten out there.
Right.
He saw 2 dead aliens and 1 was alive at the crash site and said that 1 was just walking around, but they were so very small, about the size of a 10-year-old. They were about 4 feet tall and their heads looked like a bug that they used to play with as a child called Child of the Earth. We had never heard of that, so we had to look it up. It's like, well, yeah, I guess kind of.
I think the fact that it was hairless and the head was ill-fitted to the body. It was too big.
Big and egg-shaped, had big eyes.
Big eyes, black eyes. And he said that the one that was alive was, I thought this was interesting, it was very sad. He just, he could feel that it was sad. And he felt bad about the fact, and that there was nothing that they could do.
Kind of seems to be a common
theme
right there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason why she knew anything about this was because she'd been sick. And so her dad had taken her to the doctor and evidently kept her in town. And so he just took her to the firehouse, and she was laying down on the couch when all this happened. And he had come back with this debris, and she got to see all of it, knew about everything.
And she was the one who said that when they dropped it on the table, it spread like water.
Now, here's the darker side that we talked about. So somebody from the government showed up on their door the next day, and he was wanting to know where the little girl was that was at the fire station. Well, it had been her, and so she came out, and he had this black baton in his hand, and he was smacking it in his other hand. And he said, "You didn't see anything?" And she said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "You did not see anything?" And she goes, "Yes, I did." It wasn't, and she was like 10 or 12 at the time. It wasn't in her vocabulary, really, to lie, And he kept saying, "No, you didn't see anything." And then he told her, "Okay, if you say one word of this to anyone, I will separate your whole family and send them to either." Now you have to realize this was during World War II. Right at the end. And we had concentration camps for the Germans because they didn't know who was enemy and who was an American, really. And so they had 2 German concentration camps at Fort Douglas, Utah, and Oglethorpe in Georgia. Or they had the Japanese concentration camps in Poston in Arizona. And he said that we will separate you up and take you to concentration camps. Or, since you're out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, we could take you out and shoot you and leave you for dead, and nobody would ever find the bodies. And, of course, as you can about imagine, right after the war, you just didn't question any of this stuff. You just did as you were told. And so she never said one word to anybody about anything, never even talked to her parents about it anymore. She said she did remember when her mom's friend would come over, because evidently her mom's friend's husband had also been a part of that.
Right.
And he was talking about the bodies, the aliens. And she overheard that, but it was never discussed in the house. It was never discussed with her dad. In fact, both her mom and her dad went to their deathbed without ever saying a word. And it wasn't until she was in her 60s that they finally interviewed her. And oh my gosh, the poor thing, you talk about trauma.
She was terrified even to talk about it. She said it felt like it took her back to being that 12-year-old girl again.
And her husband and her kids were all mad at her that she had never told them. Well, you can see why, the trauma that left. I mean,
yeah.
And at that point, it's still, those who did come out were considered crazy. They had everybody believe them. Or they were non-credible witnesses or things like that. So why would you? Why would you risk anything? The family shame, embarrassment, or ridicule, harassment, or worse.
Right. There was one UFO whistleblower case where a man testified that there have been spacecraft and non-human biologics that have been covered up by agencies and individuals. And the government really chose to start covering it up, particularly at Roswell, even though after initially the people who went there didn't know that it was a big secret, and the truth came out, and then the cover-up started.
And after that cover-up happened, I mean, a lot of time went by. So we're talking from 1947, they put the squelch to it, and everything was tight. And then it wasn't until 1980s, or no, 19, like that. It was way after that something started to come up. Conspiracy theories. And then it really wasn't until probably late 90s, 2000 that part ramped up.
But it's been interesting because there's been a lot of interest. I think 4 different presidents and several different congressmen throughout the years have tried to get that information and have that information released to the public, and they were denied.
And it's not just that even so much denied. That's why I said the compartmentalism. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. I watched one entire interview with a gentleman who he had been in the military in the Air Force. And then after he got out of the military, and he was in a lot of special ops things, But he became a public contractor that the government then hires out.
Mm-hmm.
See, they do that because then if they hire you as said company, then there's really not a lot of record of all this, and then it can't really so much be tied to the government. If you have this agency hiring out a general contractor who then hires out these other general contractors that come in and do all these things
and everybody just does like one individual little piece, and there's like, you know, 2 people in the world that know about all of it that are going to help put it all together.
So it's so compartmentalized. So that's why when they go into some of the senators and they want to know this, they don't know anything. In fact, they start asking the private contractor, you help us out because you know more than
we do.
Mm-hmm. In fact, that gentleman, and we'll get into that one maybe a little later, but his whole thing was escorting and bringing UAPs into dock or wherever hangars that they're taking them. I mean, this is like a pretty constant thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing that I found just telling in this whole thing was when they talked about security clearances.
And even that gentleman said that a lot of these UAPs that they're bringing in, they're not all alien.
Right.
I mean, some of them are, well, who knows? Right? Either our military that are kind of stray or other people's military stuff. But this is his job, bringing stuff in.
And some of it is not from around here.
Exactly. They've also, I listened to one last night that was very interesting as they were talking with the 2 coroners who did the autopsies on these aliens that did not exist. That was really pretty interesting.
That would be.
I think the big thing with a lot of this is the people who were all a part of that experience, and that's what it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, they didn't really know at the beginning, but they knew it was something big.
Right.
Every single one of them knew from the very beginning that this was not military.
Right.
That this was something out of this world. That's what they all said, and that they were witnessing and experiencing something of a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. But
they were all told, "Don't you ever talk about it again."
Right.
And it wasn't until they got, like I said, got older. One of them, Walter Hutt, wrote up an affidavit about what he saw in 2002. And he states he saw samples of wreckage around the table, pieces like metal foil with crazy strength, and pieces with odd markings on them. No one was able to identify any of them. It was not Russian, it wasn't Chinese. Before leaving the base, Colonel Blanchard took him to Building 84, Hangar 84. It was heavily guarded both outside and inside, and he was able to observe the objects found outside the town. He said they were approximately about 12 to 15 feet in length, not quite as wide, about 6 feet high, and kind of more of an egg shape.
And it's interesting because there were fewer people that have reported on the actual saucer than on the debris field. I think that
because
debris
that's where everybody was taken.
Yeah, it was so big. Several football fields. It took a lot more people to clean that up. But obviously the saucer was kept even more hush-hush.
Mm-hmm. In fact, they didn't even want them to know that there was another crash site.
Yep.
Because he said the surface appearance was like metallic. There was no windows or portals. You were able to see a couple of bodies under a tarp. Well, you could see the heads that were larger than normal. Size was about that of a
10-year-old child.
With big black eyes and some wearing some sort of a single jumpsuit type thing. That has been mentioned a lot with the different interviews that I have listened to and people's reports, that it is a single jumpsuit without buttons, without zippers, without
any sort of fastening that we would recognize.
Well, since we're talking about Roswell, and there is so much to this, and a lot will argue, again, what we watched, they kept talking about the spiritual side of this. Mm-hmm. When they were trying to communicate with the one, sometimes it was emotion, you could feel the sad, there was like a mental telepathy, sort of, but it was more on the emotion side. And then they kept talking about it being a spiritual thing. Mm-hmm. Well, as we said last time, that what we really believe is this is the big, great deception.
That's coming.
Oh yeah. These things have been around for, well, since the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Probably one would argue. Well, I don't know if they're before they were.
Right.
Well, the Nephilim were not before that.
That's
I guess
true.
it would be after. But if you look at the spiritual side, we know that there are numbers that are specific that relate to things.
Mm-hmm.
And the number 33 is huge for the occult. 33 is huge for the fallen realm. Everything is 33 degrees. I mean, with Mount Hermon is 33 degrees. That was the mountain that the fallen realm landed on.
Mm-hmm.
And the Masons, they'll probably get me in trouble, but they have 33 third degree Mason. It's at the top. So if you're a math person, you're going to want to get into the degrees, longitude, latitude, circumference. You will actually love this. But while it is a lot, I want to try to make it understandable and as simple as possible. Because this is really mind-blowing, what you're going to find out at the end. I would encourage you, if you really, really want to dig into this, get Dr. Tom Horn's book, The Nephilim Stargate. It's not a very big book, and this is in there about midway through, pages 82 to 86, something like that. He gets into how and where the craft landed is 33 degrees north latitude of Roswell, at a distance of 2,012 miles from the equator. When multiplied by pi, the result is 104 degrees, which coincidentally is the longitude of the impact site. Let's dive a little deeper. At Roswell, if pi is multiplied by the latitude from 33 degrees to 33.59, a line with the resultant longitude can be traced showing the precise flight path the disk traveled before impact.
And the only place on Earth where 33 degrees latitude and 104 degrees longitude exists without lying in an ocean, as these coordinates do in the Eastern Hemisphere, is a few miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico.
So the sacred number 33 multiplied by pi just happens to produce the location where the flying saucer crash landed in 1947. It gets better than this. Again, there is a lot, and this gets really, really deep. I can't even go there with you on this, but it does multiply out, and it's when you're taking the year 2012, because major things happened in 2012.
The Roswell event was not an accident. And if you think about it, it was the start of this big cover-up that then got people talking. It got international attention and has kept people's attention.
Conspiracy theories and
everything. But then as this deception gets, you want to talk about a long con. As the deception gets closer and closer, then they're revealing little bits of information here and there, and little nuggets here and there, and the amount of UFO activity and disclosures that have continued to come up and to happen. UFOs and UAPs are no longer a thing of the conspiracy theory fringe groups anymore. It's real, it's happening. There are things out there that people are seeing and encountering and experiencing. And this was all part of the plan.
so getting back to the numbers, and again, I said you just got to get the book because it gets kind of deep, but I mean, the numbers are there. He breaks it up very well. We have a group, or we have an organization called SETI. Don't you think that's interesting? As we just talked about SETI.
We did. I had that thought when we found out the name of it.
Which is the search of extraterrestrial intelligence. They have mathematically come up with the points on a sphere and the nautical miles around the Earth. And basically the numbers are 19.47. Again, as I said, they go back to that 2012 they talked about. That was a huge event that had happened. And using those numbers, it literally comes up to the predicted date of July 4th, 1947.
Wow.
So not only could you have predicted the exact landing site, but you could have predicted the exact day when it was going to happen. It wasn't until, well, I don't even think I knew that it happened on July 4th. I always talk about 1947. I had no clue what day.
Mm-hmm.
I had one of those aha moments. That's probably where they came up with the whole thing for the Independence Day movie.
Oh.
Because when did the aliens come?
On July 4th.
July 4th.
Never thought of it.
I just thought it was the movie, and I was like, oh, who knew? The real thing happened before the movie.
Imagine that.
Yeah, those aliens are way uglier than that movie.
That's true. Over the last few episodes, we have shown a lot of evidence, gone over a lot of testimony. There are people from all walks of life, very highly educated, well-respected members of military and government, and just all kinds of people that have seen and experienced otherworldly things. Denying it anymore really kind of puts you on the outside. There is something out there, and we have a pretty good idea of what it is and what's coming, and it's not good.
No, and this is where we're talking about the Great Deception. We have people from, including even up to the Vatican, calling them our space brothers and welcoming them. And the problem is we talked about last week, you have to go all the way, if you want the answers, you got to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 6. These things are not from another world, they're from another dimension. They are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that have come back, and they are looking for things to take form. We're going to get into some very disturbing stuff actually coming up of what has happened not only during abductions, but the cattle mutilations, animal mutilations. Basically, they're looking for skin suits.
Mm-hmm. And some of the things that have been seen in places around the world by some of our military elite, there are things happening and things being done that are definitely not human and not humane.
And I would even go back forth. What has this all been about, though, with Roswell? Why the big cover-up? It's about knowledge. There were things that were happening before Roswell in the 1930s, when Hitler was first kind of coming into power. He hadn't declared war yet, but he was getting ready. And he wanted to win. And he was going around and he was collecting all of these sacred religious relics all over the world, whatever he could find. He was looking for power, he was looking for knowledge. And I can remember growing up, Dad always talked about he was trying to create the Aryan race. And I said, what's the Aryan race? This is, a blonde hair, blue eye. And it never made sense to me, because if you looked at all the pictures of the German soldiers, they were dark-haired, dark-eyed, even Hitler. What would be the whole blonde hair, blue? Well, actual Aryan...
That's a different thing all the way around.
Is not human.
No.
Aryan is more of a, I would say, angelic. Others would say alien race. In fact, there was a lot of stuff going in, and one could really kind of dig into that rabbit hole. Down in Antarctica, they were doing a lot of stuff, the Germans. In fact, we had a couple generals, we'll get into this more, the trips that he made and what he found. There's so much more to that last trip of his, because he wasn't going up for testing and research for cold weather for the machines. They took a ton of military firepower, and it was cut short almost immediately, and they came right back home.
Right.
Why I bring this up is because it has been under much speculation, and I would say more than speculation, much conspiracy theory, that when America and the Allies stopped Hitler at World War II, they took, was it like 57 or 87 scientists?
A large number.
It was a large number.
Over 50, yeah.
That were doing the very experiments that Hitler was going for. He was so deep into the occult. He was so deep into this vast hunger for forbidden knowledge. Things that we weren't supposed to have, and the testing that he was doing, and he was trying to create life. He was trying to clone things way back when. Well, why would he be doing this? Because in the occult, the voices that he was listening to,
We're not good ones.
no, they were the fallen realm that were wanting him to come up with this technology so that way that we could be making skin suits. So what did we do? We went and we took all of those scientists, brought
their research
and their equipment, a lot of it, brought it to America, and I would argue stuck them in Area 51, which would be why that was completely off limits. What better way than to keep people from even messing with it or going there, but to have the big conspiracy theory about aliens as a side note, as a
distraction to what was actually happening.
And you fast forward and you look at the technology that we have, and the stuff, just like we talked about that acetone metal. You know, none of this existed before that landed, and all of a sudden we have it. You know, so many. You think about TV ads. They could not sell anything back in the 80s without it being space age technology. What are you hearing with a lot of the infomercials now on stuff?
We're going back to that space age technology.
Exactly. Because it sounds cool. It sounds like
we're just fast forwarding to the future.
You look at even flashlights that they're selling. Oh, it's developed by NASA and space age technology. Yeah.
They're getting help.
Anything to sell a flashlight. But we wanted to bring this information to you because if you're like us, more than likely you probably were not alive during the Roswell incident either. You've heard of it, but you really don't know anything about it. And there's a lot more there to uncover and to dig. And when you look at the whole picture, you look at the whole scheme, not just a crash site, not just an event, but on a whole spiritual level as well. And like we said, there was one other crash that nobody even talks about that happened 250 miles away, but guess what? It's all on that same plane. Everything that has happened, even like we said, that longitudinal thing, it is right there on it. That one was completely closed-lipped.
Oh yeah, there was a gentleman. Yeah, there was a gentleman that was interviewed that was part of the cleanup crew for the St. Augustine incident. But again, I mean, no one has heard about that. No one talks about it.
And it was the same week. But they put the kibosh on Roswell immediately, so then that wasn't ever even picked up.
Right. So interestingly enough, the gentleman had talked to some people and they went out to this site, and I think it was the niece, or maybe the granddaughter of the man who owned the farm at the time, remembers him talking about the fact that this had happened on their property and that he would kind of go out and look for things. And she didn't know if he'd ever found anything after the cleanup had been done, but she thought if he had, that he might have hidden some things in these caves that were on the property.
She heard him talk about taking stuff.
And so this crew went into some of the caves, and they did end up finding some pieces, interestingly enough. They were a little bit different than the crash site at Roswell. But just the fact that it was just completely as if it never happened is quite interesting.
I bet you probably hadn't heard of that one either. It's amazing what you find out when you dig in.
It is.
Let me ask you, what can you take away from this episode? Why should you care? What does it even matter to you? Because UAPs are becoming a very big phenomenon right now. I mean, there are people, you get on TV, you get on social media, there are sightings happening all over. This is ramping up for the big disclosure.
And there are lots of people who are beyond interested, beyond fascinated with this, and they're seeking it out and they're looking for these experiences. And you need to be careful because you don't know what it is you're asking to be a part of.
The very UFO yearly festivals that they have at Roswell, it is not what you would think. You would think if they're having a UFO festival, it would be, they have booths and everything, it would be people from, I don't know, NASA or military. Oh, so you're interested in this? Well, come here and you know, join up and you could be part of our scientific team or something like that.
Or science or flight and those kinds of things.
Nope, none of that at all. It is all religious.
New Age.
Tarot cards, palm reading, almost every stand. It's fortune telling, it's manifesting, it's meditating to our earthly brothers and sisters. Not what you would expect if it was really a scientific phenomenon.
Right, or a other world kind of situation.
So here's how we knew this anyway, but this is the big deception. Jesus said, in the end, even the elite would be deceived. That we are to be on guard and we are to watch out. That's really why we're bringing this to you, so that way you know a little history, that way you can sound a little educated when somebody talks to you about this. But at the heart of it, really know what's going on. And that the Bible does have a lot more to say about the UAP phenomenon than what a lot of people think.
Right.
Ultimately, in the end, we don't want you to be deceived. Whether you choose to believe us or not, that's up to you. But you can't say, we didn't tell you. Until next time, live long and prosper.